Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let us now go to Jeffrey Smith, a best-selling author. We had a lot of scientists on that he's recommended. Really just a great researcher. He is the director of the Institute for Responsible Technology. That sounds extremist. And is one of the world's leading advocates against GM foods. His book, Seeds of Deception, all of it sold at InfoWarsStore.com, I would add, as an evil capitalist, is rated the #1 book on the subject and has been a substantial influence on public perception and even legislation worldwide. Smith has reached tens of millions of people through hundreds of media interviews. It's got to be more than that. He produced the video Hidden Dangers in Kids' Meals and also writes a popular monthly syndicated column. He is the Genetic Engineering Committee of the Sierra Club. I don't like a lot of what they do, but I like that part. He is the former vice president of marketing for GMO Detection Laboratory and ran for the U.S. Congress. And he's from his home state in Iowa. We've gone and interviewed him there. Beautiful corn country. ResponsibleTechnology.org is the site. And, folks, we've got the science. We've got the studies. Rats get fed this stuff. They grow big, fat tumors. Honeybees eat it. They die. It runs from bad to worse. And I remember that Washington Post article last year. We covered a bunch where it said, farmers caught not following GM regulations. And in the article, maybe pull that up. You know, there needs to be more enforcement on farmers. And it said they're not planting the refuges for the bees of the non-GMO corn, so the bees are going and getting the pollen from the BT corn that has its own pesticide and dying. So see, the poor bees are having to eat what we're fed. They're dying. So joining us is Jeffrey Smith. There's big move, big Supreme Court ruling, big defeat, of course, but they own the courts. Globally, a lot of victories. What is the latest? We take you now to, I guess, are you in Iowa right now, Jeffrey?
Today I'm in California, tomorrow in Connecticut, next week in Iowa.
All right, my friend. Well, your Skype looks like you're in the room with us. Tell us what's happening in the war for being able to label. I mean, even if somebody thinks GMO is a great thing, hey, go eat it. You know.
Well, the Vermont House overwhelmingly voted in favor of labeling as a state bill. Now, it hasn't gone to the Senate there yet, but that was the first time in U.S. history that a House voted in favor of labeling. And last year, a explicit threat by Monsanto's attorney to the state of Vermont, saying that they would sue the state, caused the governor to essentially deep six the legislation at that time. So we're hoping that the governor finds his power and his energy and is willing to stand up to Monsanto and do what 90% of his constituents and 90% of Americans want, and what 64 countries already offer, and that's mandatory labeling of genetically engineered foods. Now, there's also live bills in many other states, including a ballot initiative in Washington state. You may recall that last year, a ballot initiative narrowly failed in California when the biotech industry spent more than $1 million a day lying about the impacts of labeling. But we think that Washington has a better chance, whereas California, 48.6% voted in favor of labeling. We think we'll have the majority there, and we may in fact win in Connecticut, Vermont, Maine, and many other states.
No one can argue with the right to have something labeled. And again, they always lie and say, we've always crossed plants. They're not crossing the same subspecies or families. They're not even involved in hybridization. Explain to people, we're going to break in a moment, but what's going on here? I mean, these are pharmacological crops, a lot of them, and rats don't end up having a very good time eating this.
Well, they take genes from one species, like bacteria, soil bacteria, for example, that produces its own toxic insecticide, and force it into the DNA of plants like corn. A study that came out this week showed that when albino mice were fed this Bt toxin, it caused damage to their red blood cells and possible advancement of leukemia. Other studies have shown that this Bt toxin can poke holes in human cells, can end up in human blood and in the blood of unborn fetuses, and it pokes holes in the cells. And so when it gets in the brain, because there's no blood-brain barrier developed in the fetuses, it might be causing brain damage as well. So this is an example of something that they've concocted and put on the market, claiming that this Bt toxin, which is known to break open the stomach of insects to kill them, is not harmful for humans or mammals, and now we know it's not true.
Well, what's wrong with a little leukemia? I mean, cancer rates are up. I mean, we are getting rid of the excess population. That'll save the earth. I mean, maybe the answer is feed our children extra GMO. They'll be free once they're in little coffins 6 feet under. By the way, major studies come out on a weekly basis, more than a weekly, every few days. Big, prestigious ones. Smith can always go over them. That's why his books are so important. They're like textbooks. Everything's documented. Everything's very conservative. And he says maybe linked. I mean, it's overwhelming. Like Harvard's come out and admitted that they looked at 20-plus studies, and oh, yeah, sodium hydrofluorosilicic acid is causing brain damage and cancer. Why are they putting it in the water? It's a toxic waste that they'd have to pay to store, so put it in the water. They call it fluoride. It's really even worse. It's had some of its electrons manipulated. And so what Smith's getting into here is just the tip of the iceberg. And he is conservative about it all, but even being conservative, it's pretty bad. I saw a big study out last week where pesticides are linked to autism. No kidding. And GM BT's linked to brain damage. Of course. I mean, it kills bugs. They go, well, it's naturally occurring. Fungus, what, 100, 200, 1,000 times, depending on the variety, stronger. And then you eat it. I mean, bugs can't eat it, but you're supposed to. Jeffrey, what else is going on in the fight right now with this Supreme Court ruling? What are some of the new studies out there? It looks like we're winning the fight for hearts and minds, but Monsanto and others are in power, and so it's the immovable object comes up against an unstoppable force. What's going to happen?
Well, I do think that we're winning the overall war, but not on the level of the federal government and not on the level of the courts. The Supreme Court yesterday just announced that Monsanto won its court case against a farmer who purchased some seeds, actually some feed from a mill, and planted it and tried to say that the patent didn't apply because it was basically the second generation of Monsanto's soybeans. Well, the court didn't go for that. And it was interesting that Clarence Thomas did not recuse himself, even though he was a former Monsanto lawyer. And this is the third time that he didn't recuse himself on a GMO decision. So we've lost that recent one in the Supreme Court. A study came out today examining 5 years of the diplomatic cables, and there was about 1,000 cables looked at over 5 years, showing that the State Department is basically deployed as Monsanto's enforcement wing around the world, trying to push biotechnology on other countries. We see that the USDA is basically marching lockstep with Monsanto, with one exception. This week they did announce, or actually last Friday afternoon, they did announce that they weren't going to give a rubber stamp approval of the Agent Orange crops. Those are crops genetically engineered not to die when sprayed with 2,4-D, one of the components of Agent Orange, and those that are genetically engineered to resist dicamba. Both very, very serious toxins, could cause serious health issues, and they said they wanted an environmental impact statement done before they looked at the approval process.
Not to mention all this stuff now filling the water table.
Absolutely. We have now glyphosate, which is the active ingredient of Roundup, was the subject of a 49-page study. And I just interviewed one of the co-authors. It's going to be available on our website probably tomorrow, responsibletechnology.org, where glyphosate and Roundup are linked to autism, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, virtually, as they say, every single disease related to a Western diet, anorexia nervosa, anxiety, aggression. It turns out that Roundup, or its active ingredient glyphosate, it disables a couple of very important metabolic pathways, and it disables them in our gut bacteria. So it causes, for example, a problem in producing tryptophan, which is the precursor to serotonin. Serotonin will tell the body, you're full now, stop eating. So if there's not enough serotonin, you may just keep eating. Serotonin is also important for sleep and stress levels, etc., and that may be negatively involved. The whole ability for the cells to pull sugar out of the blood may be compromised because of another aspect.
Let me just stop you for a minute here. Sure. Think about this, folks. We've got the highest level of diabetes in the world, highest level of cancer, most obese, IQs are lowering. I mean, that's not just education. We're being poisoned. I mean, it's a cocktail of things, and the power structure knows this. I mean, what do you think they're up to? They just don't care?
Well, they continue to ignore the research. I remember talking to a FDA official who was very high up in GMO evaluations. And I told her the two different studies that we were aware of and have been talking about for years. One that showed that genes can transfer into the DNA of gut bacteria and potentially continue to function, which means long after we stop eating GMOs, we may be producing this toxic insecticide or the Roundup Ready gene, and that also that genes may be unstable, because there was evidence showing that the genetic sequence of the same event, but analyzed in two different laboratories, were different, which means it might produce something completely unexpected.
It is hard to try to keep my children off GMO, but they're probably off of it 90% of the time. And they know as mammals that if they just put something out in the environment, we will just take it and accept it, and we'll muddle through it. They'll use our capacity to adapt and improvise in hard situations to put up with this. I was once on first-class airplane flight going up to be on the View, and there was the president of a major bank. I'll just leave it at that because he figured out who I was at the end. I got pretty upset that he'd been talking to me. And he just said, it doesn't matter what you do. They'll put up with anything. It's their adaptiveness. And the fact that we know they're adaptive, talking about us like we're not even human. And I already knew this, but having this guy, you know, tell me this. I've seen on TV, you know his name. To have him sit there, he was flying down here to see his retired general father who lives in San Antonio. I sat there for 3 hours on the New York flight while this guy, and we talked. And off and on. You know, he had the perfect gray hair, the perfect black trench coat, cashmere, you know, when he got up and put it on. You know, his suit, even though he'd been on a flight, looked perfect. And he looked like a James Bond type guy. And I told him, I said, doesn't matter how slick you are, you're going to be defeated in the end. He was just like, But what he said repeatedly is the people will muddle through anything. And they use that. They use our own adaptiveness and the fact that we'll put up with so much to not notice the ambient background of all this that's being turned up. And they know full well what they're doing. It's come out that Monsanto, 15 years ago, it came out in the news, and then again 10 years ago, and then again last year, at their own facilities, doesn't eat their own GMO and demands organic. The communist Chinese elite demand their own secret farms. That's come out, and it's been a big scandal. It's the same thing in Europe. The, quote, clean vaccines the German government and British government got. See, I'm not even so much against vaccine technology, folks. I know you can get some immunity from that. It's that you can't trust these companies who have these histories of testing and all this and all the autism and all this. My point is that we have to get conscious of what's happening. It's like if you put a slow kill poison in a pond to kill feral hogs. It's illegal, but people do it because they're out of control in Texas, invasive species. And because they've already eaten all the baby deer, run off the deer, taken the deer's forage. So there's no deer they're going to get poisoned, maybe some coyotes. You poison that pond, and the deer will come, and the pigs will come, and they will drink from it. And they don't know why everybody starts dying a week later. And it's the same thing. This is ambient. It builds up. And this is what they talk about in eco-science by the White House science czar, is putting stuff in our food and water. The UN's been caught doing it. Now I get into why they're doing it. A lot of it's companies don't care. So the globalists just let other companies that just don't care or do whatever they want. I mean, it's a lot of neglect, not caring. You know, Bayer with the factor rate, millions of ampules filled with HIV and hepatitis, knowing it was a death sentence for a decade, selling it out into the public. And then when it came out in court in Australia and France, the executives are like, well, they're hemophiliacs anyways. They're a drain on society. Let them die. Those are a lot of people love. These are people that had lives and were treating their hemophilia and living a good life. And you killed them. And then you're like, let them. You know what? I say you're not human. How would you like being lined up and shot up full of hepatitis, you punks? How would you like that? Stop treating us like we're animals. Excuse me. I'm going back to our guest. Jeffrey Smith. Folks, I have empathy because my instincts are aligned with life, not because I'm some wimp. Real men have empathy, ladies and gentlemen, because what happens to other people is going to happen to us. And I have to go through hell. I have to go through hell to try to keep my kids off this stuff. Then I see other people's kids who look like they're death. You go look how unhealthy people are and how dumb people are and all the weird diseases and isms and things that are happening. And it's all linked to the chemical diet, the bio crap, all of it. I'm sorry, Jeffrey, I'm ranting. This stuff gets to me because I know I'm right. I know you're right. I know the history, and it just doesn't stop. And the arrogance of these people, and there's no way these elitists that are doing this, even though they try to avoid it, there's no way they can avoid it. Isn't the proof of them trying to avoid it through the entire power structure proof that they know?
Well, I talked to a former Monsanto scientist, and he said 3 of his colleagues were testing the milk from cows treated with Monsanto's bovine growth hormone. And they found so much cancer-promoting IGF-1 hormone in the milk that the 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. Now, it was clear, obvious, that these 3 Monsanto scientists believed that the milk might be creating cancer, refused to feed it to their families, and yet they somehow felt either okay or at least powerless to stop the company that they worked for from marketing it to the rest of the public. Now, you talked about your kids and bringing them out to eat. I want to share a story that happened 3 weeks ago at MIT. I was giving a talk at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, along with Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who I interview, and her interview is going to come out tomorrow at responsibletechnology.org, a fascinating interview about the dangers of glyphosate, or Roundup. And I asked the audience, as I typically do these days, how many of you have avoided GMOs and noticed a change in your health? And a woman shot up her hand and said, I saw your film recently, Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives. Now, you have that on your site. It's the most powerful, game-changing video. It changes people's diet on the spot. She saw the film, and a light bulb went off. Her 6.5-year-old boy was desperately aggressive, out of control. They tried to call him retarded. They wanted to take him out of school. She saw other parents in the video describing the improvements of their autistic kids. They saw farmers talking about the improvements in their animals, doctors talking about the improvements in their patients. So she immediately took her child off of all genetically modified foods and said she has a new child now. He's no longer aggressive, no longer being threatened with the term retarded. No one wants to take him out of school. He's completely calm and well organized in his brain. Now, this is one of numerous stories. I've heard thousands of stories of people talking about allergies and asthma and brain fog and lethargy and skin problems and kidney disease, infertility, gastrointestinal disorders, a whole host of problems getting better when they stop eating GMOs. And I've been to the doctor's offices with cameras interviewing the doctors and the patients. Some patients say they got rid of Crohn's disease in 3 days, or irritable bowel in 6 weeks, or
incredible.
And when you look at them, when you look at the individuals removing GMOs from their diet, they may have to buy organic or reduce processed foods. So there's potential cofactors. And I understand, you know what I mean by cofactors. Maybe it's the additives that are being taken out. But when the livestock remove GM soy and replace it only with non-GM soy, remove GM corn and replace it with non-GM corn, there are no cofactors. It's just that one change. And they get rid of diarrhea in 2 or 3 days. They get rid of birth defects, no more deaths from ulcers. Medicine rates go down dramatically.
I've talked to so many farmers more than a decade ago. I have a lot of family that are farmers. I live around farmers. They say, look, we go on GMO, we start having most our calves born dead. The baby pigs die. Everything starts dying, and because it has pesticides in it, it has all sorts of other things engineered into it. I want you to get into some of the science here, but again, this is something that the power structure that you just mentioned knows and is aware of. So my question to you is, how much what do you expect to happen with this as the diabetes, the cancer, everything goes up, as more and more studies come out linking it to this? I mean, will we have Nuremberg trials for these GMO companies?
Well, I'm actually doing some deep research into linking GMOs with autism, with allergies, with asthma, with gluten sensitivity, infertility, and gut problems. And I'm working with some of the top professionals and practitioners in these areas to show the link. Now, what's happening, however, is good news, Alex, and that is that as people watch the movie Genetic Roulette, or they go to our website, non-GMOshoppingguide.com, or download our free app, Shop No GMO, and learn to avoid GMOs, then it's applying economic pressure to the food companies. So last year in 2012, products that were labeled non-GMO grew in sales by 26%, outpacing all other categories. In fact, when Whole Foods announced it was going to require labeling in 5 years, they told USA Today that when a product becomes third-party verified as non-GMO, sales increase 15 to 30%. Now, we know that the rest of the food companies are listening.
So it's free market, voting with our dollars is the only main weapon we've got.
It's the main weapon we've got, plus the possibility of passing some of these labeling laws in states, which again allows for voting with our dollars by choosing the non-GMO. So yes, we have the power here. We don't want to give up the power and say the FDA will bail us out or the USDA will bail us out. And you know that as well as I do. And in the case of GMOs, the biotech industry has been calling the shots. It was Monsanto's former attorney at the FDA who was in charge of GMO policy, ignored the warnings of the scientists working at the agency and said no testing was necessary.
They own the Supreme Court, everything. It's a total joke.
Absolutely. So, but what they don't own is the ability for you and I to get the information out to those who are health conscious, to parents who want to protect their kids, to those who are sick, to healthcare professionals, to religious people that think GMO means God move over. We're targeting these receptive peoples, receptive, low-hanging non-GMO fruit, as I call them. So when we start to get about 5% of U.S. shoppers avoiding GM ingredients, that should be a tipping point. And what's happening now is we did a study on the impact of the movie Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives, and virtually everyone in the audience, before the credits rolled, were willing to change their diet on the spot and have their loved ones watch the same movie, because when we have doctors speak about GMOs, they speak with far more conviction about the problems than I do, because they get to experiment on their patients. They get to tell their patients, remove GMOs, let's see what happens. And they do it 10 times, 100 times. One woman did it 5,000 times, and she said, it never doesn't work. Everyone gets better, which leads us to believe that GMOs are a major contributor to these wide variety of diseases that are on the rise in the U.S. population since GMOs were introduced. And the same diseases and disorders on the rise are those that individuals are reporting go away when they eliminate GMOs.
Wow. And they know the fluoride's deadly in our water. They know the aspartame's making people go blind and have early onset of neurological disorders. They know the GMO is just devastating. I mean, the studies that are in your books and videos, let's put them up on screen for TV viewers. Folks, you can support the work of Mr. Smith and Infowars, but more importantly, wake your friends and family up. If you can organize a showing in your neighborhood of Genetic Roulette, the film, and have the book there that's like a textbook that shows all the documents, that will save lives. And look, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. I mean, look at McDonald's. When I first heard like 7 years ago on a news report that they had silicone in their McNuggets, I didn't believe it. And then I went and looked it up, and they have loopholes called an additive, and a bunch of other chains do it. I mean, it's not just GMO. It's like plastic in the food. I mean, no wonder there's kidney failure all over the place. It is so insane what they've gotten away with. So go to InfoWarsStore.com, get Genetic Roulette, DVD book special, get a discount, get both of them together. You know, that's why they don't want, under No Child Left Behind, teachers being able to teach where they just hand out packets now. They don't want a teacher sneaking in and showing this. Well, you know what? Break the rules. Go to your principal and say, I need to teach them how to love to learn, you know, not how to be robots. We've got, your churches should be showing Genetic Roulette and also The World According to Monsanto, Seeds of Deception, the case against fluoride, all of it available at InfoWarsStore.com. Now, I've got to say this. We've got all the studies, the science. I want to get into that, other areas, because I don't want to just ask the questions. You're the expert here, but I research this every day so I can verify what you're saying and then a lot more. I know you're holding back because you're a big target here of these people, but you can see the worm turning. It's like, almost like Monsanto was like, you know, Scientologists. People were scared to talk about them, and suddenly they're not. And people were scared to talk about Obama, now they're not. It's kind of like the dam breaking. But I know so many engineers, scientists, oil company people that I've run into, family, people I know, doctors. One guy puts in silicon factories. And I've talked to him, and they'll say, man, you know what wakes me up about GMO? I probably talked, no exaggeration, more than 20 people have told me this over the years, just anecdotally, separately. They go, I went to Ukraine to help build an oil refinery, or I went to Czech Republic to do this. That was in 2 cases, or I went to Japan to put this in. And they go, I lost 40 pounds in 3 months. Man, I drank like a fish. I ate like a pig. Those people stay up all night partying. I was same thing about the Czech Republic, but they're all skinny and healthy. They live longer than us smoking cigarettes. What is the French? I talked to one guy who was doing stuff for me. He goes, man, they smoke cigarettes. They get drunk every night. They party constantly. They sleep 4 hours a night. They look great. He goes, everybody I talk to, men, women, they go to Europe and places that don't have GMO and they get healthy. What's going on?
We've heard that same thing for many years, and sometimes it's even more specific, Alex. Sometimes people say, I can't have soy in the U.S., but when I have soy in Europe, it doesn't cause a reaction. Same with corn. That's because the tipping point of consumer rejection did kick GMOs out of direct derivatives in Europe, in the 27 countries there. They do have animal feed that's genetically engineered, but they don't have soy lecithin or high fructose corn syrup, etc., that we have here. Likewise, when people say that they can eat the organic varieties but not the GM varieties, this gives us an indication that it is, in fact, the GMO that's causing the problem. Now, the study that came out that you mentioned earlier in September of last year, this was trying to define what's causing the problem. Is it the genetic engineering, or is it the Roundup that gets poured onto these Roundup-ready crops? So they took rats that were eating either genetically engineered corn that was Roundup ready, so it was sprayed with Roundup, or they were just eating Roundup in their water supply, or they were just eating the corn that wasn't treated with Roundup. But in all 3 cases, Alex, the animals got early death, organ damage, and massive multiple tumors. Up to 80% of the female rats had tumors mostly in the mammary glands. So in this case, we think it's both the Roundup herbicide that's sprayed on the crops, as well as the massive collateral damage that occurs in the DNA as a result of the process of genetic engineering. So it's a double whammy. Then you have this sweet corn that they're selling in Walmart, that's Monsanto sweet corn. It's not only Roundup ready, but it also produces the Bt toxin that we know breaks little holes in human cells, causing leakage. If it causes leaky gut, many scientists link that with autoimmune disease, with allergies, asthma, cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's.
And that's why it attacks. That's why it affects behavior. You drink, it affects your brain. Well, you eat a bunch of pesticide garbage, you're going to get irritable. You're going to get aggressive. We'll be right back with our amazing guest, Jeffrey Smith. Get the books and videos at InfoWarsStore.com. Yeah, folks, the film Genetic Roulette was 2012 Movie of the Year, Solari Report, Transformational Film of the Year, Aware Guide, and again, it's available at InfoWarsStore.com. And yeah, you support us getting the word out. You support what he's doing, what we're doing. But I mean, really, it's about waking up, because you need to take this personal, and myself included. Every time I do one of these interviews, I think, you know all this, but you still go in a restaurant and don't even ask, is this organic? And by demanding that, it will then create the market, and then it will displace it. Just like you can't even find non-GMO milk now, or hormone milk. It's all organic everywhere I go around the country, because people, unless it's a low-income area at a gas station. And that's really the exciting thing. We demand quality, we demand service, we demand transparency. It doesn't matter how many lawyers in government Monsanto has. It doesn't matter how many people they own. And this is just basic self-preservation. And by the way, I've researched it. These are eugenicists, folks. They know exactly what they're doing. It's not just Monsanto. And I look at the rat photos. Type in GMO rat photos if you dare, and look at the studies. And I've had top scientists on countless times. You've heard them, that were like making millions a year as GMO scientists, had patents, were working with these really big companies, and then found out it was sterilizing lab animals and things. And so they would just refuse to be part of it anymore, and then be demonized and attacked, but they've been vindicated. Well, what's the point spending all this money if your grandkids, get cancer? And by the way, Jeffrey Smith, you haven't even gotten into what happens by the 2nd and 3rd generation in guinea pigs and rats when they're fed different GMO diets. Tell people about that briefly, and what the studies show the worst linked GMO things are? I mean, is it the pesticide-based BT things?
Well, as far as the multiple generations go, there was a study not yet published, but we did announce the results when the Moscow scientists did report them. And that is when they fed hamsters genetically modified soybeans, by the third generation, most were sterile. They also died at 4 or 5 times the rate compared to controls that were eating the non-GM soybeans. And many of the hamsters had hair growing in their mouths. Now, hair growing in the mouths is not something that's common at all. It's extremely rare, but they had never...
Well, his Skype broke up.
As they had with the GMO-fed groups.
Sorry, your Skype broke up for a moment. Why are you discriminating against people with hair in their mouths? I mean, maybe that's a gift the government's going to give us.
Well, it's true. You know, you never know. One thing, though, about this time, I'm thinking some of your listeners may want to know how to avoid GMOs. Shall we give them a little primer on that?
Yes.
Okay, there are 9 genetically modified food crops. They are soy, corn, cottonseed oil, canola oil, sugar from sugar beets, alfalfa, which is used as hay for animals. There's zucchini and yellow crookneck squash, not all of it, but some of it, as well as papaya from either Hawaii or China. Now, all of these are found at nongmoshoppingguide.com or in the free download iPhone application Shop No GMO. We also have about 10,000 products listed in the guide that are third-party verified as non-GMO. Here are the 4 ways to avoid GMOs. 1, buy organic, not allowed to intentionally use GMOs. 2, buy products that say non-GMO on the package. 3, buy products listed in our shopping guide. Or 4, avoid the at-risk ingredients. Now, we mentioned 9 GM food crops, but some of these have derivatives like dextrose and maltodextrin, etc. Those derivatives are also listed on the guide, and you can find, even in the processed food sections in major supermarkets, products that don't have these derivatives from GMOs.
All right, we're out of time. We've got to talk to you again soon. I'm going to do some overdrive to take calls. Thank you so much, Mr. Smith. We'll talk to you soon.